Hi guys, welcome to this introduction to the Uninvited project. If you look back at our previous projects, you'll find that Degrees of Freedom are into doing bits of manifesto about why we're doing certain things. And then we'll go on to tell you about the nitty-gritty about how this project might work. So here's the manifesto. If you look at the history of art over the last 150 years, you could read it as a struggle between those people who are in authority, who to define what art is, how it should be made, how it should be viewed, how it should be displayed, and those artists, particularly artists in avant-garde, who resist those definitions, who want to change or stretch the way in which the authority want to impose itself on them. Yes. So when we were doing a little bit of research, you could sort of read off things like Dada to Rauschenberg, history of the land art and why it came to be, body art, even things like autodestructive art. You can see it as a revolt against this authority. But the thing that's kind of noticeable is that the nature of capitalism and the nature of contemporary international art is such that it has this enormous thirst for novelty, so that every time artists revolt against previous traditions, that revolt is taken up and subsumed within the art market. If you look at the way where art has been displayed over time, where it's moved from art salons to art galleries, from public art museums to public art spaces, you inevitably begin to think about who the gatekeepers are for these spaces. Because more and more of public space is being occupied by art, but who gets into those art spaces is restricted by the so-called curators of those spaces, who have kind of enormous power. So really, what Uninvited is about is to challenge curators and the philosophy of curationism. So what we want to do is to transgress and challenge art spaces. Project. We've kind of looked at a number of these kind of interventions and transgressions that have been made. So let's kind of start with two sorts of transgressions over which we have a question mark. The first set, which we might call staged transgressions, are transgressions that purport to subvert something, but in reality they're kind of false transgressions. So just picking an example. Now imagine a kind of plush gallery at a private foundation in Turin, beautiful white walls, you've got whole hosts of really important VIPs sipping their cocktails. And this guy rushes into this gathering and starts drawing this car on a completely pristine white wall. And he does that, and then he picks up various objects and starts attacking that drawing, trying to get into this supposed car. The guests are flummoxed. They don't know how to react. What sort of transgression is this within this kind of holy space? After a little while, the curator stands up and explains that this is actually the work of Robin Rode, and this is an artist who is making this transgression within the space. At that point, of course, the audience knows exactly how to react, because they've been told what the context of this so-called transgression is. Which is not really a transgression, it's just something that purports to be one. Increasing incidents of major public institutions like V&A allowing art that's in the margins to take over that institution. So the V&A Friday Lates, which have been going on for several years, allow particular groups of artists and artist movements to take over the V&A space for one evening, ever so often a Friday evening. And the thing about it is that although they take over that space remains fundamentally within the ownership and the design of those institutions. They kind of nestle within that kind of context. So you might ask yourself, how transgressive is that when it is an invited intervention, when it is a controlled intervention by those institutions? So we have some questions about whether these so-called transgressions or challenges actually constitute transgressions. The other whole field of transgressions that's worth looking at is what we might call self-promotional transgressions by individual artists. So you kind of start off, well, we might start off with Banksy's intervention in 2003 at the Tate Modern, for those of you who remember, where he kind of put up his, stick-on kind of paintings up there. That's been kind of followed up by similar interventions by artists for different purposes. So Pascal Gounod at the Louvre in 2010, and Andrzej Sobipan at the National Museum of Poland in 2012. And a lot of those interventions have been dismissed as simple self-promotion, but in different ways by the different institutions. And as an aside, it's kind of quite interesting to see how the different cultures within those countries dictated how those institutions reacted to it. For instance, Tate Britain, when Banksy intervened, their press release stated, rather boldly, a man left his personal possession at the gallery and we invite him to collect it. And in contrast, you've had the director of the Louvre in 2010 who reacts to Pascal Gounod's intervention as saying, well, that art is bad, useless, and a real piece of crap. And they confiscated it. Whereas the director of the National Museum of Poland called Andrzej's intervention as a witty artistic happening and put the work that he'd put into the museum restaurant. So says different things about how different institutions handle the uninvited elements of an intervention, from bracketing it to insulting it, throwing it out, confiscating it, or incorporating it into the institution itself. Now let's move on to two interventions that really excited us. Has been the augmented reality occupation of MoMA in New York and the occupation of Tate Modern by Liberate Tate. If you click on the links on this webpage, you'll go straight to those videos on YouTube. Okay, now kind of moving on to talking about our project. It's not just about self-promotion. So if people want to just take a bit of their work and go off and hang it at an art space, well, I'm not sure we're kind of would be too keen on that. But apart from that, any art form, any art space, it's defined as anywhere where art is exhibited or made accessible to the public. Any sort of transgressions, so they could be small or large, they could be open or secret, they could be very brief, they could be extended, but as long as the project subverts the rules, values and expectations of that art space, then we'd be interested in it. We see this project in 3 stages. The first stage is artists coming together in conversations to generate or share ideas, to think about collaborations for some of the bigger interventions they might have in mind, and to plan the project. Stage 2 would be actually carrying out the interventions. And stage 3 would be an event, probably in a gallery in central London, where public would be invited for the artists to share their experience of the interventions, and to which the artists would bring together the documentation and the ephemera connected with their projects. The next conversation on this project will be on Tuesday, 29th of September, at the Espacio Gallery in Bethnal Green Road, starting at 7 p.m. Details on this webpage. And we hope to see you there. Thank you for your interest in the project.